The phone rang at 5:06 a.m. I didn't jump. I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a half-cold mug of coffee, listening to the wind shift across the lake. The screen lit up with the number from the security service. I picked up. "There's a woman at your front gate, Ms. Hart," the man said. "She's with a moving company. Says this property belongs to her." I didn't ask who. I already knew. "What name did she give?" I asked anyway. "Vanessa Hart," he said. "Of course she brought documents," he added. "Looks official. She's insisting she has the right to enter." "Let her in," I said and hung up. I didn't change out of my robe. I didn't brush my hair. I stood in the hallway and waited. The engine of the truck rumbled up the gravel. I watched from the top of the stairs as she stepped out. Vanessa, still in heels, not even pretending this was a misunderstanding. Her makeup was flawless. In one hand, she held a manila folder. Behind her, movers began unloading a couch that wasn't mine. She smiled when she saw me, like this was a real estate handoff. "Good morning," she said lightly. "I figured we'd beat the heat." I said nothing. She walked in like it was hers already. "Caleb's tied up at work, but I've got everything here," she continued, flipping open the folder and laying down a set of printed documents on the hallway table. "This is the deed, notarized just as we discussed." I glanced at it only for a second, then looked up at her. She didn't flinch. "I know this is sudden," she went on, "but you said you'd think about transferring things and, well, we just wanted to get started. There's a lot to move." I nodded once, then turned and walked upstairs without a word. I closed the door to my study behind me, unlatched the top drawer, and pulled out the folder I'd labeled months ago, Transfer Hart Trust. 2 nights before this moving truck, I set the table for 3 like I always did. Simple plates, warm light, the familiar hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. Caleb walked in first, joking half-heartedly about traffic. Vanessa followed, already scrolling. The dinner was unremarkable in every way that should have made it peaceful. But there was a static in the air, the sort you feel before a storm changes shape. Vanessa hardly lifted her eyes from her phone. Whatever was on that screen held more of her attention than the food in front of her, or the woman who cooked it. Caleb cleared his throat halfway through. "Have you thought more about downsizing?" I took a slow sip of water. "This is as small as I go." Vanessa smirked into her phone. "It's just a conversation, Angelia." I didn't respond. I cut my chicken methodically, chewing in the silence they clearly tried to fill. After dinner, Caleb lingered near the sink while Vanessa wandered toward the hallway, still typing. I stacked plates, giving them the courtesy of privacy, but their voices carried more than they realized. "We just need her to agree," Vanessa said. There was a pause, the quiet kind that weighs more than a shout. "Or," Caleb replied, his voice lower but certain, "we do it our way." The plates clinked too loudly in my hand. I set them down slowly. My pulse didn't spike. My breathing didn't snag. What filled my chest wasn't heartbreak, not yet. It was clarity. I dried my hands and walked to the study without looking back. The hallway felt longer than usual, like something stretching between the woman I had been and the one I was becoming. I closed the study door, locked it, and crossed to the desk I rarely opened in anyone's presence. The drawer slid out with a whisper. Inside, the folder waited, thick with intention. Transfer Hart Trust. I ran my thumb along the edge of the label, the moment folding into place with a strange, settled calm that felt less like fear and more like recognition. The summer after my husband died was the quietest season of my life. The lake didn't change, still silver at dawn, still impossibly still before rain, but the house felt different. Lighter in the mornings, heavier at night. A year before he passed, during that long third hospital stay when the machines took over most of the talking, a thought settled in my mind with a vast, cold clarity. I couldn't leave anything to chance, so I acted quietly. I had the house's deed transferred into my name alone. No announcements, no family meeting, just a handful of notarized signatures and my resolve steady and unshaken amidst hospital beeping and antiseptic air. My husband knew. Not in words, but in the quiet nod he gave when I brought it up once at 2 a.m., the kind of nod that meant, do what keeps you safe. Caleb never asked. Vanessa never looked long enough to notice something might have shifted. That first summer without him, the 2 of them didn't visit. The lake was too far. The nights were too quiet. The house, apparently, was stuck in an era nobody wanted anymore. They said this without knowing the irony. That the era embedded in those walls was the very one they were now trying to cash in. I spent those months tending to the house as if tending to something living. I repainted the window trim with steady hands, pulled weeds at sunrise, mended the patio boards that buckled after winter frost. The garden learned to grow around me again, and slowly, so did I. The new will was drawn up on a Wednesday afternoon. No dramatics, no witnesses other than the attorney, and the unmistakable weight of choice. I placed it in a separate trust under my maiden name, an identity whole and unmarred by anyone's expectation of me. I didn't lie by omission. I simply didn't volunteer information to people who weren't listening. And until 2 days ago, no one asked. Which is why, when I opened the transfer folder that night in my study, it felt less like a revelation and more like a long written sentence finally reaching its punctuation. She was already inside by the time I came back down, standing in the center of the living room like a realtor showing off square footage. 2 movers carried in a white velvet bench I'd never seen before. One of them asked where the master bedroom was. Vanessa pointed down the hall with the confidence of someone who believed her own lie. When she saw me, she lifted a stack of paper as if it were a peace offering. "A quitclaim deed," she said, as though that would mean something to me. Signed and notarized. Caleb said it was all handled. She laid it on the coffee table between us like a trophy. My name was at the bottom, Angelia Hart. The signature looked almost perfect, but it wasn't mine. I didn't touch the paper. I didn't ask where she got it. The notary stamp looked official enough, though I knew better than to trust a seal printed off a laser printer and shaded in to mimic pressure. Instead, I turned and walked into the kitchen. She didn't follow. I moved slowly, as if I were still waking up from a dream. I spooned grounds into the coffee maker, added water, and pressed the button with the calm of someone preparing for guests. Then I placed my phone on the counter, face down, already recording. I'd started doing that weeks ago. Not paranoia, just insurance. When the smell of coffee filled the air, I called back to her, soft but clear. "Did you bring all your things today?" She didn't hesitate. "Everything." I nodded to myself as if that confirmed something. Maybe it did. She thought this was the end of something, a handover, a final step. She didn't realize what it truly was. A beginning. The living room filled with new furniture and the illusion of ownership. But the walls knew better. So did I. When the coffee finished brewing, I poured a single cup and stood in silence, listening to the soft thud of boxes being set down in rooms that weren't hers. And then came the knock I had been waiting for. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the message came through. I had just finished watering the garden when my phone buzzed with a voice memo from Vanessa. No greeting, no context, just her voice, low and clipped, like she was walking through a parking lot. "She's old. I don't think she's all there anymore. We can make it look like she agreed." That was all. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I didn't believe she'd say it, but because she had been careless enough to send it to me. I didn't reply, didn't forward it, didn't save it to the cloud. I simply filed it into a folder I'd already created, the same one with Caleb's earlier voicemail about helping me let go. I didn't need fireworks, I just needed truth. Quiet, cold, traceable. That evening, I drove into town and bought a full set of high-grade deadbolts. 4 cylinders keyed alike, reinforced strike plates, no smart locks, nothing they could override with an app. But I didn't install them. Instead, I sat at the table and made 3 calls. First to my lawyer, Ms. Whitaker. I asked for a review of any recent deed activity under my name. I didn't explain why. She didn't ask. Second to my doctor, who had always treated me with the kind of respect some reserve only for the young. I scheduled a full cognitive exam, voluntary, documented. I wanted the paperwork. Third to Marta. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice as warm and dry as it was back when we first met at the nursing home where we both worked. She'd handled probate and estate cases for decades. She didn't ask what I needed. She just said, "Come by tomorrow." By the time night settled in, the shape of everything had shifted. I could feel it, like the weight of the house had leaned toward me again, just slightly, like it remembered whose name still held the keys. And that was when I started labeling the recordings by date. The clinic smelled faintly of paper forms and hand sanitizer, the kind of sterile calm that makes most people nervous. It steadied me. The intake nurse asked if I was there because someone had expressed concern. I shook my head. "No," I said, "I'm here because someone will." She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. I took the test without hesitation. Memory recall, pattern recognition, logic chains, questions designed to find cracks. I found none. Score, excellent. Cognitive function fully intact. Decision-making capacity unimpaired. At the end, I asked for something unusual. an official notarized copy. "It's not routine," the doctor said. "I don't need routine," I replied. When it was done, I slid the sealed document into a folder that had begun to feel less like paperwork and more like armor. Next came the recordings. One by one, I labeled them by date and content. The clinic room was silent as I worked. June 3rd, Vanessa voice memo. Cognitive doubt. June 11th, Caleb hallway conversation. Intent to bypass consent. June 26th, Caleb voicemail. "She's barely holding it together. We're helping her move on." Hearing his voice again didn't fracture me the way it might have weeks earlier. Something in me had cooled with purpose. Then came the deed review. Ms. Whitaker didn't need long. She traced a finger along the notary seal, then looked up. "The notary listed here died 4 years ago. Forgery." The words settled into the room heavier than anger, quieter than grief. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "We can file charges, quietly or publicly." I closed the folder slowly. "Not yet." She didn't push. She simply nodded like a woman who understood that timing is also evidence. They believed I was slipping. That assumption had given me leverage, had made them loud, sloppy, confident. Let them think I was harmless a little longer, because the next part needed witnesses. The first box through the door was labeled Master Bedding. I watched the man carrying it glance around, confused, maybe a little embarrassed, as if he sensed something wasn't quite right. Vanessa didn't notice. She was too busy directing traffic, pointing toward rooms she'd never lived in, rearranging furniture she hadn't paid for. I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. Outside, past the hedges, a beige sedan sat idling just beyond the bend. Inside were Ms. Whitaker and a county deputy I'd met once before during a noise complaint 2 summers back. I remembered he'd complimented my roses. I sent one word: ready. Minutes later, just as the movers began easing a large cream-colored couch through the front door, 2 men stepped inside. Neither wore a uniform, but they didn't need to. You could tell who they were by the silence they brought with them. "Ma'am," one of them said, nodding at Vanessa. She froze mid-sentence, then quickly recovered, stepping forward with the same folder she'd proudly displayed that morning. "This has all been handled. My husband's name is on the documents. She agreed to transfer." The deputy didn't take it from her. He turned to me. I stood, reached into the sideboard and retrieved my folder, twice as thick, twice as heavy. I handed it over without speaking. The deputy opened it and began reading slowly, carefully. His brow tightened around the 3rd page. When he reached the notarized cognitive evaluation and the timeline of recordings, he turned to Vanessa. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we're going to need you to step outside while we verify some of this." Her eyes narrowed. "This is a mistake. My husband, he's on his way." "That's fine," the deputy replied. "We'll speak to him, too." The other officer gestured toward the door. Vanessa didn't move at first. Then, as if realizing that resistance would only raise questions she couldn't answer, she walked past me without a word. I didn't follow. Instead, I walked over to the couch, still half blocking the doorway, and gently tapped the armrest. "This goes back on the truck." He pulled into the driveway, fast, tires crunching over gravel, like he thought speed might undo what he was already too late to stop. The car barely came to a full stop before he was out, slamming the door and marching toward the porch. Vanessa was already being escorted to her car. She didn't yell, didn't protest, but her eyes burned as she passed him, and whatever she whispered to him, he didn't repeat. Then he turned to me. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" I didn't answer. He looked around, taking in the half-moved boxes, the 2 officers still talking near the gate, the moving truck now at a standstill. His face shifted from confusion to anger. Then something else, something closer to embarrassment. "You called the cops on us," he said, incredulous. Still, I said nothing. Ms. Whitaker stepped forward and offered the printed quitclaim deed, the one they'd handed me with such confidence. He took it with a jerk, scanned the first page, then flipped to the signature line. He stared at it like it might rearrange itself under his gaze. "I didn't know he began. "I thought she said you agreed." "I didn't," I said, "and you didn't ask." He looked up, mouth half open, but the words didn't come. "You let her speak for both of you," I continued. "You stood by while she rewrote the story." I pulled something from my pocket and held it out to him. A photo, worn and slightly curled. Caleb, at 8 years old, crouched in the garden beside his father, hands covered in soil, both of them grinning at the tomato plant they'd just put in the ground. He didn't take it. Instead, he looked away, jaw clenched like memory itself had become an accusation. "So what now?" he asked. I tucked the photo back into my sweater and stepped aside, motioning toward the door. "You'll have to live somewhere else," I said. "This house remembers the people who built it." I turned and walked toward the back, where the afternoon sun was already warming the patio bricks. By noon, the last box was gone. The truck rolled away without ceremony, and the dust it stirred settled before anyone looked back. No one said goodbye. No one offered a final word. The air in the house grew still again, like it had exhaled. I moved through the rooms slowly, not to reminisce, but to record. The guest room, the office, the hall closet they'd peeked into when they thought I wasn't watching. I took photos from every angle, time-stamped, labeled, not because I thought they'd come back, but because I knew they might try to rewrite what happened here. I scanned every page from my folder: medical evaluations, notarized letters, the forged quitclaim deed, my real deed, the full chain of ownership. Then I uploaded it all to the encrypted server tied to the Hart Trust. Off-site, secured. No one could touch it without my key. Finally, I filed the police report, not because I wanted anyone arrested, but because there had to be a record. Not for them, for me. Some people collect keepsakes from wars. I collect documents. Back in the kitchen, I picked up the same mug from earlier that morning, still sitting where I'd left it. I poured fresh coffee and sat at the table, steam rising gently through the light. There was no celebration, no sharp thrill of justice, just the soft, quiet presence of something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. The walls didn't feel invaded anymore. The silence wasn't hollow. Now it was full. It was mine. I made a list for tomorrow: garden maintenance, a call to Martya to update the trust, and a note to change the locks after all. Not because I felt unsafe, because I finally had the time. I reached for the garden gloves sitting by the door and opened the back screen, the sun pressing lightly on my face. The tomato vines had started to climb again, stronger this year, after the frost. And just past the garden bed, the gate creaked open. Marta came by on a Thursday just after lunch. She brought bakery bread and didn't mention the headlines. We didn't need to. The silence between old friends is a language of its own. We walked slowly along the lake trail, the same one my husband used to clear every spring. The tall grass had grown back in places, wild and leaning. But I left it this year. Some things are better left to bend. When we reached the edge of the garden, I paused and pointed toward the rose. "It survived frost," I said. "It'll survive them." Marta smiled, then bent down to pull a weed poking through the beans. Neither of us said their names. Back at the house, the new locks were in. Heavy, solid, keyed by hand. No more soft clicks, no more flimsy hardware from chain stores. These weren't just for keeping others out. They were for reminding me that I chose what stayed in. The legal team had sent updates. Charges were pending, though no court date yet. I hadn't asked for the specifics. That part no longer needed my energy. Instead, I called Miss Whitaker and amended my will one final time. Caleb's name came off as executive. Marta's name went on. There were no tears, just a simple crossing out, a page replaced. That evening, I planted new seeds: basil, peas, and something called moonflowers that bloom at night. I tucked each into the soil with the kind of patience that only arrives after chaos. At dawn the next day, I made coffee the way I always had. The sound of the kettle, the measured pour, the warmth of the mug in my hand, it all returned like clockwork. But something else had returned too. The stillness didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like mine. And when I opened the front door that morning and stepped onto the porch, the breeze met me without resistance, moving through a house that no longer had to defend itself. The garden waited. The light shifted across the floorboards, and I picked up the tell without hesitation.